Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 169. Special 90th anniversary of the Chag HaGeula of Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz, which took place this week, 90 years ago, in the year Tafresh Pei Zayin, 1927, and now we are in 2017. So 90 years ago, the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested, Tezvav Sivan, arrested for counter-revolutionary activity, which was essentially a euphemism for his activities in spreading and strengthening Yiddishkeit. And with the sakonis nefashos, the danger involved, remember there was no due process, there was only prosecutors and no defense. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was first verdict was actually death, Chmona Litzlan. Then it was commuted to Golus for 10 years, and then for 3 years in Kastrama and Gimel Tammuz. And then 9 days later, it was completely removed and he was freed completely. But that began a process where they essentially pressured the Frierdiker Rebbe to have to leave Russia and leave behind his entire Chassidim in Eden, which was something the Frierdiker Rebbe Shum Eifen did not want to do. But everything has its deeper purpose, as the Frierdiker Rebbe says in many shlichus. Hashgacha Pratis led him from there to Europe, to Poland, to Atzmus, to Latvia, and then ultimately to the United States in 1940. Being that it's 90 years from the Geula, it's appropriate to talk about that. And let me begin with something unique. It was 40 years ago. It was Tov Lamed Zayin. Was the 50th anniversary of Yud Beis Tammuz. My father, who was the editor and publisher of the Allgemeine Journal, wanted to make a special beilage, a special supplement to the newspaper dedicated to the 50th anniversary. And he gathered different material, but in order to make it unique, he asked the Rebbe then if the Rebbe could share some information that has not been published yet about Yud Beis Tammuz. And that would go into this supplement. The Rebbe responded to my father that it's a very good idea. However, he suggests first he should go speak to other people who were there. Remember, the Rebbe was there, of course, during the actual arrest and liberation. He should speak to others that were there and gather whatever they have information, and then he should come back to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe will supplement or fill in other details that they did not fill in. And the Rebbe mentioned, of course, his own Rebbetzin, the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka. The Rebbe called her Musya, to go to Musya, to her sister, to Chaim Lieberman, and I'm not sure if the Rebbe mentioned any other names, maybe to Rashag, I'm not sure. I think so. So my father did exactly that. He went and interviewed them. And as witnesses, you always hear a little tidbit here, a little tidbit there. One piece of information that I'll share that I heard then from my father, that he heard from the Rebbetzin said, the night they came to arrest my father, she was speaking in Yiddish to my father, of course, they came to arrest my father, so I was out on a walk with my husband, with my future husband, which was the Rebbe. And we were, I think she mentioned him by name. She said we were walking, she said, on a small bridge that over water. It was a very nice walk, and we had no idea what was coming. The impending doom, so to speak. Anyway, they walked back home, and she went into, the Rebbe walked her to the house, and she went back into her house, Frierdiker Rebbe's house, and the Rebbe was about to leave. When she went in, she realized that they had come to arrest the Frierdiker Rebbe, so she couldn't leave the house, so she went upstairs to the second floor, and she called out to the Rebbe from the window, "Midhabim guest, we have guests," which obviously was a very clear indication what that meant, in the middle of the night, guest. And the Rebbe then went to Chaim Lieberman and to others to let them know, especially to, that's when he swallowed and they destroyed documents that could have been used as evidence against the Frierdiker Rebbe. This is a little note that was added 40 years ago, 50th anniversary. Later, when my father told the Rebbe about this detail, he said, yes, absolutely, he remembers it. And I don't know if the Rebbe added anything, he just said he understood right away. The Rebbe added what happened next. The Rebbetzin only told the story about she called out to her husband, to her future husband, I should say. And the Rebbe then went and said what he did. There were more information, and there was actually the argument of that issue that year in Tov Lamed Zayin, 1977. My father published it with unique pictures and a lot of information. There were other things also said then, but I just wanted to begin with one little note. So the Rebbe obviously was directly involved in more ways than we even know, but this is one indication of it. Now, the most important question, of course, especially in context of Chassidus Applied, is the relevance What is the relevance and significance of Yud Beis and Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz today? What practical relevance does it have to us? It's an event that happened. It was a major event because the Frierdiker Rebbe was literally at the danger of being, of them killing him, Chmona Litzlan, and he was saved. The Chag Geula. Now we know there's a letter the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote the next year. Remember, just to give you a little of the chronology, this was Yud Beis Tammuz. Then the summer came, of course, and that Simchas Torah, Tafresh Peiches, would be the last time the Frierdiker Rebbe would fabring, and right after Simchas Torah, the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia. So were you talking about Tammuz of El Tishrei? 3-4 months later, he was out. After Tishrei that year, I remember once someone was in our home. She was, I think she was this daughter of Yankel Zhidovitzer, who was a big chassid in Moscow. She remembers that when she was a little girl, the Frierdiker Rebbe was leaving. So all the families, the way the Frierdiker Rebbe was traveling by train, wherever train station there were chassidim, they would come to the train station and the Frierdiker Rebbe was waving to them. They would all be saying goodbye. You could imagine the emotional scene. Frierdiker Rebbe literally leaving Russia. So it was for those that lived through that period, obviously it was a very difficult period, one of the harshest in Jewish history, and especially in the context of the Frierdiker Rebbe and his work. However, as we see, the fact is there was a Geula, and the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote the next year, Tafresh Peiches, when he spoke about the first anniversary of Yud Beis Tammuz, he wrote a letter saying, Lo Oisi Bilvad, famous letter that the Rebbe would cite literally every year, Yud Beis Tammuz, that not me alone, not I alone was redeemed. Lo Oisi Bilvad Gol HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but everybody, every Mechavei Torah, those that love Torah, and Marbitzei and our Esek Mitzvahs, and even Kol Asher Yisrael B'Shem Yisrael Yechuna, even someone that just calls himself by the name Yisrael, is just a Jew, and doesn't identify as a Jew, but that's his name, meaning that's his title, everybody was redeemed. Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz. And thus this should become a Yom Tov, a Chag Geula, not just for myself, and not just for the close Chassidim, but for every Jew. Which of course begs the question, it was a Geula, you could say for Chabad, it was a Geula for the Frierdiker Rebbe. But to make a statement like that, not just himself, but it was a Geula for everyone, how do you see that? And how do we understand that? And of course, therein lies also the answer to its relevance to us. Because if it was just a Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe, so it's relevant to him, and being Chassidim of the Rebbe, or being the people of the generation of the Frierdiker Rebbe, obviously are impacted indirectly. But to say it's also our Geula, not just because it's a Geula of the Rebbe, because there's something something symbolic about this Geula that affects everybody. What exactly is that? So in different years the Rebbe spoke about it, but I'm particularly focusing on something he said 50 years ago, Tovshin Chav Zayin. We're doing all the anniversaries. So 40 years ago, I spoke about 50 years ago. And this was right after, of course, the 6-day war. And the Rebbe said them very powerful words. And part of what he said was that the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe actually paved the way. It opened the door for other achievements that would ultimately happen, including the Rebbe gave credit to the war of the 6-day war, which, as we know, was the arms of the Arab countries, especially Egypt, were being armed by the Soviet and their support. So the victory over that opened up, the door opened up, the tziner, the channel opened up, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was released. But we need to explain that as well. Later shlichus is also clear that not only that, but many other nisim and giluim all came as a result of the events back then. I remember very vividly, Tovshin Mem was a Lag B'Omer parade. And the Rebbe suddenly, in the middle of the Lag B'Omer parade, was speaking to the children in Yiddish. And then the Rebbe started speaking a language that I didn't understand immediately. The Rebbe started speaking in Russian. It was the first time he spoke in Russian in public. After that, there would be several times the Rebbe spoke in Russian. And what did he say? He basically was speaking to the Russian Jews and saying exactly what the Frierdiker Rebbe said back in 1928 and 27, that according to the Chok, according to the law of the Soviet law, you're allowed to be Jewish and practice your Judaism. Obviously, they didn't necessarily uphold the law, but the law allows for that. And the Rebbe was speaking about that idea. And of course, that was the time in 1980 was the new exodus, which soon began, a new exodus of Soviet Jews that would leave and ultimately would lead within 10 years, in 1990, to the fall of the Soviet Union. So let's answer the question, maybe going backwards, how the Rebbe saw the fall of the Soviet Union, which he called a bloodless, without Muhammad, the Soviet Union, the mighty Soviet Empire, which reigned from 1917, basically from the beginning of the, from after the Russian Revolution. Let's say 1920 just to be, 1918. Till when? Till 1990. Basically 70 years. As the Rebbe would always emphasize, that Ilmuli Nagdua, Chanani Mishal V'Azariah, they sacrificed them with Meiser Nefesh because they were challenged that if you don't bow down to an idol, we'll throw you into Kivshanish. So they allowed themselves to be thrown. But the Gemara says that had it been a Nisayan, that wouldn't have been for 1 minute, but they would have continuously been pressured. We don't know whether they would have withstood this Nisayan. And the Rebbe spoke about the Soviet Jews. The Eden Bachere Mosach HaBarzel, as the Rebbe put it, behind the Iron Curtain. That they were in a prison 70 years, not once, 70 years, and still withstood many of the Nisyanis. Many people obviously were hurt, were killed, and so on, but you still saw the remnants of Amunah and faith, Chassidim Farbrengen, all the way through those years. And then in 1990, the Soviet Union crumbled with Gorbachev and the Perestroika and all the other things that came along with, as the Rebbe put it, a bloodless change without war. Now the Rebbe made this, as a matter of fact, a siman for Geula. Let's understand why. I mean, you had many empires that fell. You had the Nazi Empire that fell. You had many oppressive empires earlier. You had the Roman Empire. You had the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire. You have many empires that fell. What suddenly happened in 1990 that the Rebbe saw this as a siman for Geula? So first of all empires that fall, big empires, are seen also as a big siman. That's why you find so often in Midrashim, on the Psukim, all over, about the 4 Goliaths. You talk about Golas Mitzrayim, of course, and then you talk about Golas Bovel, and Golas Paras Hamodai, and Golas, and then of course Golas Edom, which is the Roman Empire. So each of them signify major refinement, as the Arizal explains, and the Frierdiker Rebbe cites this from a mimer from his father, Rebbe Rashab, from Pesach Tofrei Samach Tes, and the Frierdiker Rebbe in Tovshin Tes, that all these Goliaths refer to stages, as the Arizal says, of the birur, of the refinement of the nations and the world, preparing the world for Geula. The final empire, large empire, that was complete oppression. Remember, it was a large prison. The people living in the Soviet Union, especially the Jews, not only couldn't leave, they couldn't communicate. It was a prison. And this was the second superpower. The United States was one superpower, representing a Malchus al Chesed, a haven for religious freedom and for all the rights that we are so privileged to have. And here was the antithesis to that was the Soviet Union, the mighty Soviet Union. It was an arms race, the Cold War, and it was a literal prison. So the fall of the Soviet Union was, if you see it as just another country falling, it's one thing. But if you think of it in context of history, it was the final frontier of a nation, an entire nation, a powerful nation, a superpower that suddenly succumbed. For whatever reasons were, that succumbed, and it started with, of course, Reagan became president in 1980 when the Rebbe spoke that psyche in Russian, and 10 years later, it fell. I mean, it was a process, but it finally fell. Now, someone may argue, one second, Putin is now in power, it's still, but look for what's going on for the Jews. It's a renaissance of Jewish life. Does it have elements? Is it a perfect country? Absolutely not. But that element of being that type of prison, a choking prison, that did not allow Jews to serve Hashem freely, and now does, is not just a small shift, it's a major shift, because it was the final empire that oppressed Jews. Like Mitzrayim in its time, and like Babylon in its time, and the Persians, Paras Hamodai, in their time, and Edom, the Romans, in their time, Babylon destroying, of course, the first temple, the Romans destroying the second temple. So in that context, the Soviet crumbling of the Soviet Union as that type of prison, for the Rebbe, signified a major threshold moment in history. Now, when you think about it, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Geula was essentially open that door. We didn't know what would happen. But here you have a mighty empire, and one Rebbe being imprisoned, refusing to cooperate with them. It's known all the stories of his standing strong, would not cooperate, wouldn't even speak in Russian, even though he could speak Russian, and insisted on tefillin, insisted on everything he wanted to have there imprisoned. Completely, you could say, shtus to l'kedusha, because he was at their mercy. And they actually pointed the gun to his head, Lulav and Nachmanson and all the different Jewish captors, We all know the stories. When they came to arrest him, they said, let me carry your peklach Rebbe, like my grandfather carried your grandfather's peklach, because their grandfather was Chassidim of the Tzemach Tzaddik, and they carried the Tzemach Tzaddik's peklach. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, no. Your grandfather carried my grandfather's baggage, peklach, where he wanted, with the Rebbe, where my grandfather wanted to go. And you want to carry my bags where you want me to follow where you want me to go. That not. And the continuous infighting, the continuous resistance that the Frierdiker Rebbe showed, was refused to accept any type of, as he writes in his Masechta Gehenim, as he calls it, the tractate from hell, his diary about the events and how they tortured him. They refused, for his own spirit, refused to yield an inch. And it cost him plenty health-wise. And the famous story when they pointed the gun to his head and said, Rebbe, it's time to cooperate. This thing here has made many people cooperate. And the Rebbe, without flinching, said, this tzaske, this toy, can frighten someone that has one God, one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and two worlds, or many worlds. And it wasn't just words. And when he said, we will see who will prevail. And the Rebbe said, we will see who will prevail. And what happened? He was killed within weeks, as everybody was killed, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was released with the wounds and with the pains and with the suffering, but was released and ultimately left Russia, Soviet Union, came ultimately to the United States, and we are here today, wouldn't exist had this moment not happened. So the Frierdiker Rebbe's resistance to this great mighty empire, even though at the time it could have been an individual seeming resistance, you can see the bottom line is, and this is what Chassidus explains, small resistance has, on a microcosm level, has macrocosmic impact. And this in one way did weaken this mighty power, superpower called the Soviet Union. Now at the time we may not have seen it. He was freed. That's why it wasn't just my redemption. It was a redemption. The Eibishter showed that we can weaken and break this power. Now it would take another from 1927 until 1990. We're talking 1927, 30 till 1990, 63 years, till it would actually fall. But it finally fell. So the Frierdiker Rebbe's resistance was a demonstration that Ruchnius can overcome even the greatest animal called the Soviet Union, that Klippa. There's a famous story, they say it with the Beis Yosef, they say it with the Magid. Different people, the story is told about different individuals, that once the Magid was saying a Dvar Torah, and a very complicated Gemara, the students were overwhelmed by the innovation and the clarity and the breakthrough ideas that the Magid shared. And they all went back, all excited, and we're going to share it in their communities. One of them walks into our shul between Mincha and Ma'ariv, relatively a simple group of Jews learning Gemara. They're learning this Gemara. And he hears how the teacher, who's not necessarily known as a great scholar, says exactly the Chiddush that the Magid said. He was shocked. So he went back to the Magid and said, you said a Chiddush that we, and all the scholars were so impressed with something completely innovative and original, and here's a simple person saying exactly the same Chiddush. And the Magid answered that when a person breaks through into this atmosphere, it's a psyche posach, like it says in the Zohar, and opens up the idea, once the idea enters the world's soul stratosphere, it opens up, that makes it possible for other people, even simpler people, to also understand the idea. This is the concept that we don't always see the impact of a particular innovation till years later. But it opens up a door. It's like softens the resistance. And by doing that, it opens up a door that things will happen. So the Geula of Yud Beis Tammuz was set in motion with time. But it set in motion a force. It broke the Klippa. It was like the first so-called defiance of the great Soviet Empire. So it would take many years and many pains. But ultimately, it had its impact. And in that sense, it's an opening for the Geula Mitzvah Shleim, as the Rebbe explains at length. A lot of what I said here is from the Sikh of Shlach Tovshem Mem Zayin, which I've referred to in the past. So with that, it's a different context of this 90th anniversary of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. The relevance for us today is that no matter what resistance we have, and today resistance is very different. Then it was the Dochem Beretz Mitzrayim, the resistance of Mitzrayim, of oppression. Today the resistance, unfortunately, is Evdim Be'eretz Ashur, which is being lost in the pleasures and the opulence and the prosperity of our times. Today is the klippa, the challenge of apathy, which in many ways can even be harsher than all that oppression. So we also have our goals that we have to break out from the apathy, but we get the power from Yud Beis Tammuz that every challenge can be overcome. If you hold on to those words, you have one God and two worlds. You have one God in many dimensions, then nothing can be taken away. No matter what happens in your life, there's always the ability to break through, and that breakthrough changes things. So Yud Beis Tammuz gives us not just a lesson, it also opens the door and gives us the power. It empowers us, as it empowered ultimately the fall of the Soviet Union, which no one would believe could be possible, and ultimately to the opening the door for every Geula, and ultimately the Geula Amitis Vashlema. So the relevance of lesson to us is in each one in our own lives. We have our little prisons, we have our challenges. They're very different, thank God, than those, but we sometimes can be overwhelmed by them. And here we're told and we're given the power that you can break through, and not just break through, but it's all a result of that first breakthrough that happened then. That defiance and resistance against this great klipa, the great mighty Soviet Union, Soviet Empire. And of course this gives us the lessons both on a microcosmic level and a macrocosmic level. As the Rebbe says, that as the Soviet Union fell was a major step in the world becoming ready for a world of chesed. So even though the world is not perfect, but a fall like that represents a fall in heaven, which means the Sad of these nations, the Sad is like the angel, the so-called messenger, the so-called ambassador, divine ambassador. Every nation has its ambassador, and for the Rabbeim, these great nations always represented forces that we always reflected powers above, that God gave those powers, even if they were very evil empires. But ultimately, their fall represents a major breakthrough in bringing the Geula into this world. So, with that, let us go over to some more specific things. Since we're talking about Yud Beis Tammuz and the Rebbe, so there was a question as a follow-up to Gimel Tammuz, somewhat of a controversial question. Please explain the phrase the Rebbe used to describe the Frierdiker Rebbe, Atzmus beguv gashmi. Without explanation, this seems difficult to understand and could be misconstrued to mean something that causes unneeded controversy. So literally, Atzmus Umuhus, we of course divine on the essence of the divine, manifesting itself in a body. That sounds very controversial and sounds, as a matter of fact, something that we would consider even inappropriate if someone made such a statement. But like any type of controversial statement like this, which has been misconstrued and misunderstood, I always point out, and this especially in MyLife, Chassidus Applied, all these programs, everything has to be grounded in sources. To talk about a statement like that, or any statement, Mashiach or other things that seem controversial, without sources, everybody just talks whatever comes from their gut or from their hergeshim, you can get into a lot of trouble. That's why we have a Torah and everything is grounded. If you look at shlichus of the Rebbe, the first thing that jumps out at you, besides the sheer volume, what it jumps out even before you begin to read it, is the hundreds of footnotes. As someone who worked in shlichus for many years, I can tell you, the Rebbe insisted everything be annotated. When we missed once an annotation which everybody knows, what's that? Bereshis bara l'kimus hashamayim v'sa'aretz. Who doesn't know where that says? Genesis 1:1. Or in the Hebrew, Bereshis, Aleph, Aleph. The Rebbe spoke about it at length back in Tavshim and Aleph when he spoke about a Shabbos Bereshis. About everything needs to have a footnote. And then you can say, Yesh Shleimer, this is perhaps the meaning in this source. So let's go to the source for this statement. It's a statement that Rebbe said in the first year, Achron Shal Pesach Fabrengen, Tavshin Yud. So we're talking about 2 months after the Histalkus of Yud Shvat Tavshin Yud. Shvat, Adar, Nisan. So Nisan, Achron Shal Pesach Tavshin Yud. And the Rebbe said the following words, and I'm going to read it. We have today the edits of the Rebbe edited it afterwards, and it was published. The Rebbe says, in this Fabrengen, he's talking about the Rebbe, of course. As the Rebbe says, I'm reading volume 2 of the Kutei Sichos, page 510 and 511. And let's read it from the source. So the Rebbe says, discussions of Chassidim with the Rebbe, they're not like two separate things that unite, becomes literally like one. When the Rebbe is nitke mamutza mafsid, the Rebbe is not an interface that separates, but a mamutza mechaber, an interface that connects. B'meli is doch by a chassid, mit dem Rebbe mit dem Ebersh nein zach. So by a chassid, he and the Rebbe and God are all one. And then the Rebbe says like this. I'm just translating to the English. I have not seen that this should say explicitly, it should be discussed explicitly in Chassidus. No, this is a hergish. It's a feeling. The Rebbe says, so the Mele, one who, wer es will marge sein, soll marge sein, the one who feels like this should feel. Und wer nicht, and the one that does not, the Rebbe says, I will not argue with him, I will not, ich will nicht sparen mit him, will ich mit ihm nicht sparen, yehi lo yeshaloi. I'm not going to argue with him, I'm not going to insist, I'm not going to be, whatever he feels should be for him. That's how the Rebbe edited it and it's written. So what's the hergish? So he says, it doesn't say explicitly, it's a hergish. Therefore, it's not possible to ask a question about an interface, about an intermediary. Because this is Atzmus himself. This is Atzmus Muhus allein, Naguf. Atzmus himself that placed himself in a body. And then the Rebbe continues, like it says, it brings a source. The Maimer Hazeh, Mampnei Ha'odin Dor Ashbi. Who is the face of the master? That's an Ashbi. But you're talking about Hashem, Pnei Odin? It's like, so referring to Ashbi like the face of God. Oder v'beis shlichus, during a shlichus, during a mission, even a malach is also called b'shem havaya. And again, there's sources here to each of these sources. The first one is Zeir Chelik Beis, volume 2 and Zeir 38a. And a malach is called, he says, b'shem havaya. The Geras HaKedesh, the end of Simen Chav Hey, 25. Oder v'meisha Rabbeinu had gezog v'nesati Esav. I will give you food, I will give you nourishment, Esav, I will give you food. That's in, and he refers to L'Kutei Torah, but it's not him giving, it's Hashem giving, but he's speaking, so to speak, as if he is a representative, an emissary of God. In the footnote, the Rebbe says, I saw Bali Nigla, people or students of Nigla, of Gemara and so on, ask a question, they ask a question, how could you say such a thing as man pnei odin torashbi? A barash gadol, and with great fanfare, with a great shturim, they make a big fuss about it. Hayitochem v'chulu v'chulu. How could you say such a thing? Etc., etc., etc. So the Rebbe says, Alva Mufurish, however, it states explicitly, Ke'ein ze gam benigla daraisa. Because that's in Zayar. But also in Gemara and Nigla, you also find, and where's that? Yerushalmi Bikurim, Perek Gimel, Halacha Gimel. He says, V'avaya behechel kodshe, God in his holy chamber. Do Rab Yitzchak b'Rav Lozar, b'knishta medrasha dekisin. That refers to Rab Yitzchak of Rabbi Lozar. So it has almost the same idea. Havaya behechel kodshe, referring to a human being, with using the word God in his holy sanctuary or holy chamber, is Elazar ben Zah b'knishta medrasha dekisin, which means in his Beis Medrash and his shul in the synagogue or the Beis Knesset and Beis Medrash in the Kisin in Caesarea. So that's compared to the Havaya behechel kodshe. That's what it says in the Sikha. Now, a few things. First of all, the Rebbe says a hergish. Secondly, he brings clear sources. Whatever controversial statement is this, you could say the same thing as a controversial statement with the Rashbi. How do you explain it? So there are many ways to explain it. You learn Chassidus, you realize what's a mamutza machaber. That comes from a language, from a pasuk, that Moshe was Anochi emed b'fnechem, emed beinechem and bein Hashem alekechem. I stand between you and God. So in Ranat, in the Maimer Ponim B'Ponim, he explains that there's a mamutza mafsik. A mamutza mafsik is, let's say, a translator. One person knows Hebrew, another person knows English. They can't communicate to each other, so you have a translator. He takes the words he hears in Hebrew, and he translates them. But he's a separate entity. He's not seamless. He may change the words. He may in some way stand in between. A mamutza mafsik, it's like an interface that connects two separate things, and you have a third connector. A mamutza machaber is a seamless and transparent channel. And that's due to one key word, bittul. Once you say the ovis heina and markova, that the Ov is 24/7, as he says in Tanya, chapter 23, and other places. Their constant behavior was simply a channel of reflecting and aligned with and reflecting the divine will in this world. You're not talking about a separate entity. To say a separate entity, God forbid, is a mumutza chas v'sholom. There's only one God. But to say that there are people who've dedicated their lives, that their whole being is simply to express what God wants of us, is saying that Atzmus muf in a guf, that in a body you have what Atzmus muf wants. That's one simple way to explain it. Simple. It's not simple, because most of us have never seen someone like that, so it's hard for us to imagine, because we have egos, we have personalities. Even when we're in our best behavior, we don't have that type of transparency and seamlessness. But if you think of bittul, like Chassidus explains about oir is not Atzmus, yet it is kodem kekadmuse, it says in Chassidus. Why? Because it's utterly nullified and utterly has no being and ego and sense of self. So therefore, all it is reflecting the divine. So Atzmus could exist without Eir. But Eir, once it's revealed, all it is revealing the divine source. And that's why Eir can be as Kadam Kekamuse, not because it's a powerful thing, but because it has nothing of its own. All it is an extension of the divine will or the divine presence. Then, of course, that's all it is. And that's how you explain this idea. Which goes, of course, into a deeper understanding of what a Rebbe is. But I because of limited time, let's suffice with that. If anybody has further questions, I'm happy to discuss it. But when you think about it, it's not so crazy as it sounds. It's not so controversial even as it sounds. That was what Moshe Rabbeinu was about. How could you say, Zichru Teres Moshe Avdi? Or Vayiminu B'Hashem B'Moshe Avdi, they believed in Hashem, Moshe, and someone who believes in Moshe believes like believing in Hashem, because he's not a separate entity. He's representing godliness. So someone will say, I respect God, but I don't respect a person who's completely dedicated to God's presence in this world, or God's will in this world. That's like saying that you are not respecting what God is, the gift that we have, someone who's a walking Torah, a walking Metzias of Bittul, or not even Metzias, a walking Bittul, that's just simply reflecting the divine will in this world. So that answers that. Now let's move on to some other questions that we did get with this. Let me see in what order we'll go here. Let's go, since this week, Havdil is also July 4th. So a question came in, what lessons can be learned from July 4th, Independence Day? The American Independence Day in 1776. The United States declared then the Declaration of Independence as an independent country. What can be learned? Is freedom and independence congruous with Torah? Didn't the Alter Rebbe oppose Napoleon of France because he advocated independence? The famous the story where he opposed Napoleon winning over Alexander of Russia, because although in Alexander of Russia would have been more difficult for the Jews physically, but spiritually they would not be that compromised. Whereas Napoleon was advocating freedom and fraternity and independence. So seemingly is independence consistent and congruous with Torah? It's an excellent question. I believe we've talked about it in the past, but I'm referring especially to the Sikha of Vayeshev Yud Beis, where the Rebbe speaks about this, not specifically about July 4th, but about what was the snagnus of the Alter Rebbe, because Napoleon was independence without God. Keichi ve'etzem yadi, in the words of the Pasuk. It's my power and my strength that has achieved this success. It was godless independence. But the fact that independence itself does not necessarily mean it has to be godless. When you learn in Geresh HaKedesh Simon Chaf, what does he say? Big chiddush, tremendous chiddush, one of the biggest chiddushim perhaps in all of Chassidus. He says the yesh hanivra, which is the yesh hanivra, the yesh, the independent yesh that feels that we're independent entities, says can only be created from something that does not have any source. Anything that feels it has no source, starting with the yesh, us, must be hu levade bekeiche v'yecholti. It's only he, Atzmus himself, who has no ila v'sibach as v'sholem acheres shekodmele, does not have any cause or reason that, or cause or power that brought him into being. Because mitzuyusim atzmuse, his existence comes from within himself, meaning his reality is his reality. Does not need to be justified, does not need to be put there by anything else. Only he has the power to create a yesh that should also feel independence. So we have here a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's an independence that can lead to all kinds of trouble because you feel you're on your own. But if you understand that the creation of the yesh itself, even the independence, is really a reflection of Atzmus in us, where all the higher spiritual worlds all sense their source. They all know where they come from. And here's a world that we can deny where we come from, or we cannot sense where we come from. That itself comes from Atzmus. That means our independence is truly an independence that comes from Atzmus. The wisdom we have to have is to learn, to understand it's not true independence that we're on our own, God forbid that we're independent selves, but that our independence is a reflection of the divine so-called independence. And which is why we have free will. God gave us a piece of His own independence, the ability to actually choose freely. Even though we're human beings and everything we do has a reason. You need to eat, you need to drink, we're limited. Only Atzmus doesn't have any needs. And yet when it came to free will and good and evil, and right and wrong, moral choices, we were given a piece of Atzmus. The ability to choose independently. It's not going into now the whole discussion of what Bechira Chavshis and free will is, but that's the essence of it. And it begins with our sense. So independence is how you use it. To live under monarchs and live under dictators and despots, as we spoke before about the Soviet Union, yes, may be more limited that people can't just do whatever they want, and therefore, yes, they can't also sin any way they want. But then the Rebbe says times have changed. Now we can conquer the independence of the Western world, starting from France, and transform it into something of Kedusha. So the Alter Rebbe was concerned about that too much emancipation too quickly, like the Rebbe brings about Yaakov, you have to go slowly. I can't come live with you, Esau, because we're not ready yet. The children are young, the sheep are tender. But once the Birurim continue to refine the world, we're able to confront independence and channel it and harness it toward independence, a divine independence, of using that independence to serve God and to bring the Geula. So the 4th of July, you can say, is the positive side of independence because it brought a country that gave rights, Bill of Rights, the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, all the freedoms that this country promises us. So it's not a freedom that is, as the Rebbe says, a freedom of religion, not a freedom from religion. So in other words, a freedom to choose, but we have the ability to choose. So yes, it may be easier to give, not someone take away their choice and their independence and just tell them, here's what you're supposed to do, which is maybe good for young children, but as we grow into adults, even a greater achievement is, no, do it as you wish. Be a shliach, an independent entity, but align your independence with the divine will and the divine plan. So that's how we can explain that. Next question. I said the questions are not necessarily related to one another, so we'll just move one to the next. Does the Rebbe's shlichus place introverted personalities at a disadvantage? By the way, about Yud Beis Tammuz, I want to also refer you to episode 123, where I discussed it as well last year. More details, I always talk about cross-referencing, so I wanted to mention that. So here's the question. Is it possible that introverted personalities will find it more challenging to fill what the Rebbe demands of us, as in the need to reach out to others in shlichus? Are there different expectations due to personality differences? Can an introverted personality get in the way of being a chassid? Are people expected to change because of it? Hello, Rabbi. Someone writes, I very much enjoy your weekly classes and may you continue to influence our communities in Chassidic. I am an introvert and find it difficult at times going out of my way to socialize with people. I often tell myself that I should go over to this or that person to do mivtzaim or any kind of help for that matter, whether spiritual or physical, but end up not doing it, for it starts to make me feel anxious, and when I do push myself, I find myself mumbling too much and not getting my point across, especially when I go on talucha, which makes me even more anxious. Talucha is what the Rebbe instituted at Yom Tevim, that people go from community to other communities to celebrate with them and to bring them divrei Torah, Chassidus, and so on. And it even spills over to my professional life, which I find very hard to overcome. So is it considered a deficiency? Should I force myself to be an extrovert? Please let me know what the Rebbe's point of view is on this matter. Thank you again for your extraordinary efforts. So thank you for your kind words. And regarding this topic, we discussed it in the past in episodes 28 and 146. And here's an opportunity. You can see all these archives of now 168 episodes, and we'll be 169 at the end of this one. at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. We have a landing page of all resources associated with this program, including the essays, including the contests, including previous years, and as I said, the archives, which 28 and 146 discuss this introvert topic. But since the question comes up again, try to tackle it from perhaps a different angle, or most importantly, to respond to this particular question. In Chassidus, you find, on one hand, we're told we have to work on ourselves and change our personalities. You have the Shanas Teva Midesov, the Shanas Midas Hativim, the different expressions, as the Rebbe brings and cites in the beginning of a Kuntas Sinyon Shoteres Chassidus. Which means if you have a personality in one way, you have to work on yourself. But on the other hand, we're also told you can't change your colors. Just like a leopard can't change its spots, or a tiger its stripes. So the fact of the matter is, there are parts of our personality that are not expected necessarily to go ahead and go do a complete transformation. So Chassidus has the concept of iskafia and ishapcha. Iskafia means restraint, refraining, avoiding. Ishapcha is transforming. Now in that itself, there are many levels, including sometimes you can't change something, you can harness it. A person, for example, has an aggressive behavior, they may not change it dramatically, but they can harness it toward Gedusha, and tame it toward things that are not Gedusha. Like the Gemara says about a sheikhet, someone born a particular time of the year, or particular time, the mazel of Madim, so they're going to have a more passionate, more aggressive personality. It can be used, God forbid, in destructive ways, or they can become a sheikhet. So the point is, it's a predisposition, not necessarily compels you. So when it comes to introvert, extrovert, I'm just applying this idea, something additional has to be mentioned here. Introvert, extrovert doesn't say anywhere one is positive, one is negative. It's two different types of personalities. Each has a mila. Chassidus talks about a person who's a little more morishcheda, which is a person who's a little more, morishcheda means like a darker personality, as opposed to more levena, a more lighthearted or optimistic personality. The person who's a morishcheda, it says, use it for learning Torah, because it has a certain element of being a loner, being alone at night to learn, whereas an extrovert doesn't yet have that personality. So it's all about harnessing your personality. Now, obviously, everything with measure. To go extremely and say, I'm an introvert, I will not meet anybody, I will not talk to anybody. Listen, if you're a person of a family member, you have a spouse, you have children, you have to interact. And the Rebbe also wants us to go out and talk to people. So obviously for an extrovert it may be easier, and they may be more successful at it, but an introvert could also be. I know people who have very deep relationships with others. So no, they're not social people, they're not people, but the connections they make can be very profound. And in many ways, an introvert could have a more intimate and a more profound an impact on someone than an extrovert, because extrovert often is more, say, superficial, but is more on the social side of things. So each has to learn from the other. So I don't see it as all saying that a person who's introvert has any disadvantage of fulfilling the Rebbe shlichus. No, use it well. Use it, first of all, maybe in that focus. Just like somebody is more cerebral on research as opposed to another person who's a very good, what's the word I want to use? A good salesperson. Each has an advantage. In every company, you're going to have people who are the brain people who come up with strategies and work through the whole process. And there are others who go and sell it, so to speak. So, I don't mean sell it in a derogatory way. It means that they're very good at presenting it. And others are very good at developing it. Sometimes you have the writer and the one who presents the writing. Each has a quality that the other doesn't have. So I could see the introvert having many qualities, including in the world of shlichus. Some are very good at strategizing, some are very good at teaching, some are very good at advising. And then there are people, yes, they're by naturally, they're party people, so to speak. They go to a party, they're the center of attention, they have that charisma. Two different strengths. It's apples and oranges, it's not right or wrong. So it's a matter of two things. Not changing who you are, but harnessing who you are and directing it. And yes, sometimes we have to go out of our comfort zone simply because that's the shlichus. Going out of our comfort zone, everyone. Extroverts have to go out of their comfort zone and sometimes have to be introverted. And introverts have to go out of their comfort zone and sometimes be extroverted. And that's something that we all work on and do, regardless of what our main focus may be, always going a little out of the way, out of our comfort zones, as he explains in Tanya chapter 15. Next question. Okay. What's an appropriate amount of Torah study for kids during summer? What exactly does the Rebbe desire in regards to Torah study during the summer months? if I study with my children for 10 minutes a day, is that sufficient? What was the Rebbe so disappointed about? Is it that children are not learning any Torah during the day in the summer? If that's so, would 10 minutes a day suffice? In a similar vein, a friend of mine homeschools his children. He tells me that most of the day his children don't learn. They get their studies done in a small amount of time. His wife teaches each child. The rest of the day they play and listen to story tapes, parsha tapes, etc. Is this an acceptable method of education according to the Rebbe's standards? Okay. So yes, what the Rebbe was not happy with, the concept of vacation from the word vacate. You don't vacate from oxygen. Just like someone say, 2 months I'll take off from not breathing, God forbid. The oxygen of a id, oxygen like the water, like it says about water, that id can't be separated from water like a fish can't be separated from the sea. So the oxygen, Teres Chaim, Hi Chayenu ve'erich Yameinu, the concept that he's taking off 2 months from Torah is inconceivable from the Rebbe's point of view. And if you think about it, it should be from all our point of view. So the Rebbe insisted, you have to remember that you may, yes, right now we're having less physical pressure, so you could focus on nourishing more your neshama. And therefore in summer camps or bungalow colonies or whatever this summer, you don't maybe have a formal school, which we discussed a few weeks ago that the Rebbe didn't want schools to close either. But let's take the fact that people do have more easy lifestyle, a little less pressure, but God forbid in any way to diminish the spiritual nourishment. On the contrary, you have more time for spiritual nourishment. Now, as far as how much time, I've not seen from the Rebbe exactly. I mean, you could ask the same question all year round. Children can't learn 24/7. There's a time for play, there's a time for rest, there's a time for eating, for drinking, there's a time for a little more relaxed moments. So the same question can be asked. I think it comes down to case by case. Obviously, in the yeshiva system, you have the guidelines that a school has, the hours that they have figured out children can sit and study, and then they have their rest periods, and they have recess and all the different things, and when they go home, and when they come. But if you're asking a question where the parents are in control of this, I think it's case by case. If a child is open to more spiritual nourishment through Torah, do more than 10 minutes if possible. It doesn't have to be dafka through Torah. You mentioned Torah tapes. There are many ways to spiritually nourish a child. It could be through acts of Avos Yisrael. Maybe children in the summer should go visit other children and help them do a mitzvah, or be kind to them, bring them needs. Maybe children helping other needy children, special children. There's many ways to nourish the neshama when you have more free time and you don't have the constraints of school, of heavy school schedules and all the homework and all the other pressures. So the idea of nourishing is partly through learning Torah, but also through mitzvahs and many other things we do. So I think you have to think of it that way and customize it accordingly. The main focus is to realize we have an opportunity in the summer to nourish the neshama more even than in the rest of the year when you have other pressures, even though schools are supposed to do that as well. But in the summer, because of the so-called more laid-back attitude, you have more time to do that. As far as the issue with homeschooling, look, I don't know if there's a blanket answer to this question. Homeschooling has its challenges because it doesn't have the mizgeres, the framework and the structure of a school. So it could very well be those children are doing very well through a mother and father schooling them, but you don't want them hanging around too long either. So maybe you need to have more assignments. And if you're using it for Torah tapes or story tapes, fine, by all means. But the more disciplined, the better, especially for the younger formative years. So to have a situation where you're studying just like an hour and the rest of the day is just you do whatever you want, I don't think is necessarily healthy. But again, it's case by case. And the standards of the Rebbe is the more you can, remember, don't think of it as a burden. Think of it as an emancipation, as a freedom, as a nourishment. It's like saying, minimal eating or minimal drinking or minimal oxygen. No, the more Torah, the more ruchnias, the more spiritual behavior, mitzvahs, and davening and so on that a person can infuse in their children, the better it is for their own health and welfare. Okay. Next question. Am I supposed to twiddle my thumbs until I get married? Shidduchim, as we know, can be quite challenging. Shidduchim, as we know, can be quite challenging. Since marriage consists of matching the right two people, a successful match is not entirely dependent on our own readiness. We may be all ready, but for whatever reason, we not have yet met our appropriate bashert. People can wait years until they meet the right person to start a life with. Yet, while we're waiting, the Chassidic standards expect that the person learn Torah and not pursue anything else. How is this not a recipe for an unfulfilled, drained, and unhealthy single life? A person must always feel productive, but it seems that following the Chassidic path of learning until one gets married is unreasonable for many people. What can one do about this issue? Another person writes a little differently. It seems to me that the Chabad way is that at a certain point in life, your job is to get married, quote-unquote job. Obviously, you can try, but you never know when it will happen. So most Bachrim grow up assuming that they will go through yeshiva and finish smicha, and then spend a year or two in 770, and then get married, kolol, job, shlichus. Job/shlichus, or shlichus. One, a side point really. 770 is not really an ideal place or structure to learn, so that can't last more than maybe a year or two unless you're a very special person. Two, who's to say how long it will be? Maybe you won't get married until you're 27 or 32. Until when does it apply that a Bachar is supposed to learn? Until marriage. Also, what happens is that more or less you end up waiting around for the next stage of your life. People want to move on, and they should be married, and they can't get a normal job because you're still a Bachar. Only working for a Mesid is acceptable. Everyone says just hang in there. If someone would look back when he's 28 and see that more or less he was just waiting around for the next stage of life, is pretty pitiful. What are they meant to do? Of course, the best would be to learn another year or two and get married, but that doesn't happen for so many people. I also think that if anyone would meet this older Bachar, they would say, what have you done with your life? This continues on. The yeshiva system is for everybody, let's assume, but what about afterwards? People who can really learn, can really accomplish, but most Bachrim need to move on. They can't learn all day. In short, singles are just supposed to wait around for marriage because that is where they are up to in life. Everything else in life is the time you can do it. Here you cannot, so it throws everything off. I write about Bachrim, but I think the same and very similar applies to the girls. I apologize if I'm being receptive, probably redundant, you probably meant, or not writing clearly. I hope you understand the issue I'm bringing up. Thank you very much for taking the time. Your guidance is so valuable. Okay, we spoke about this topic back in episode 120. I did actually think I talked more about women there than men, but the question is really one that's much easier to address case by case, like I always say, but I will make a few key points here. Look, if you're a person who wants to do what Torah, Chassidus, and the Rebbe wants us to do, then there's a certain approach, and that approach is you don't want to get distracted with money making or other types of investments. You want to focus on getting married. But that does not mean sitting around and being miserable. If a person is not able to really sit and learn Torah all day, so there's other ways you could get involved in. The key is to do things that are productive. I would not say just sit around, never. Productive, you can go help out a shliach. You may have a family member. You can get a job in Avedis HaKedesh. Why am I saying Avedis HaKedesh? Why not just go sell cell phones on the internet or on Amazon? And I'm not criticizing anyone that does that. Everybody has the right to do as they see fit. Because we, growing up in a Chassidic chinuch, were educated that our souls came down to earth not to sell cell phones on Amazon. Our souls came down to earth not to sell furniture. Even though this can all be very commendable jobs and people can make good parnasa and they can give tzedaka and build beautiful families. But especially in the formative years where you're focusing on the most important thing is to build your own family, you don't want to get distracted in a whole career pursuit. But on the other hand, you don't want to just sit around. And I'm talking about, like you said, the age that you're already going out of school. I've been speaking to people of that age. There are many people. And unfortunately, it's a big challenge. So the key is to keep your eyes on the ball and the focus. You don't want to become distracted by Elam Hazeh. On the other hand, you don't want to just sit around. So my suggestion is find a talent that you're good at and find a way to express it. If you're an entrepreneurial type, use it for something you put some chutza. That's what I believe the Rebbe would suggest to someone. Now, if that all doesn't work and they find a job that can keep a decent job that keeps them busy and is productive, I'm not suggesting that it's impossible to go that way. You just don't want to become focused on something else and say, you know what, I have 5 more years because I have to first build my business up. Because then you're closing off that door. So even if you didn't find the shidduch right away, to close off the door and say, you know what, I'm going to, since I didn't do that right away, let me go into business, and 5 years from now I'm going to revisit it, or 2 years from now. That is what I'm trying to negate. But yes, we have to find productive and creative ways to use our time. Obviously, if a person can learn most of the time, let them do that. If they can't, then they should learn a little and then use their time in a holy and productive way. And even if it's something rishus, with maybe some work, but should be not be done as replacing the mission of what we're here for, and what this person wants to find is ultimately find their soulmate and build a home and family. So it's some type of in-between way. Now you'll say, is it possible? Absolutely. But it's difficult. That's why it's important to have a mashpia, a mentor, someone you can speak to that you trust, someone that you can review and see options. And network. You start talking to people, you find different outlets. And don't cut yourself short. Don't underestimate yourself. You have much more potential and power than you may have. Don't let this demoralize you and say, okay, you know what? I'll satisfy for less. Don't satisfy for less. Look for a respectable, look for a mission-driven, a purpose-driven work that is going to satisfy and fulfill the calling of your soul. That's the most important thing of all, while at the same time simultaneously looking for a shidduch. Now remember, a shidduch is part of our mission. It's all part of our mission. You don't want to suddenly fragment yourself. You want to know, I'm going to build in this world a mishkan, a sanctuary for God, and I'm going to do it through building a home, but also through my work and other things. And you want all that to be part of a holistic approach instead of starting to compartmentalize and fragment your life. That's my quick answer to this. Let us move now to a next question, which is giving tzedaka. Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you for all your incredibly inspiring classes. I wanted to know, when receiving blessings and getting the benefits out of giving tzedaka, does it depend on where you give tzedaka to or which organization? Can that affect what you get back spiritually or physically? Thanks for your time. Another question in this vein. When giving tzedaka, does the place the money is going to have anything to do with the reward for giving? How should one know if he's giving tzedaka to the right place? Okay, tzedaka is one of the greatest mitzvahs. It brings closer to the gula. It's the only mitzvah where Hashem says, test me. Test me. So even if you give tzedakah for ulterior motive to save someone's life, a child's life, God says, fine. So tzedakah is a great mitzvah. Every tzedakah is great. You meet a poor person, whether it's an organization or anything. In letters from the Rebbe, and this also works, so when a person has to decide, which tzedakah should I give to? 20 people coming to me. So you could say whatever came first, in a sense, Ashgacha Pratis, let me just give it, like the story with Reb Nachum Chernobyl. What comes first, that's what you do. You don't start delaying the tzedakah process. But there's also the concept of a mokem shali bechafetz, a place that your heart desires. For example, you'll find from the letters from the Rebbe that if you want a blessing for children, give to something that's connected to children's causes, a school, a camp, and so on. The same thing is with health matters. To give sometimes in a cause that is connected to something you're particularly looking for, or particularly where you have special interest for whatever reason, there's something about it. This does not say it's absolutely that and not give tzedakah to anything else, but there is that concept. Some of us gravitate to different type of tzedakahs that speak. Is the reward greater when you do that? I don't know about reward, but it's more gratifying and in a way more connected to your shlichus. There are people, for example, who became experts for whatever reason, a particular field, let's say education, or health matters, maybe due to a challenge. So they happen to know better, and it's a place they can give tzedakah more intelligently because they happen to know the area well. So I wouldn't put it in the context of what you get back spiritually. Well, let's put it, what you get back as a reward. I would put it in the context, yes, what you get back spiritually, because kol hamispal ba'at chavere hu nenet chila. A person who prays for another person in particular needs, you'll get that need filled. So if it's something that particularly addresses an issue, like, recently I heard somebody who told me his father started getting Alzheimer's. So he started giving tzedakah to Alzheimer research and to Alzheimer homes and different places that try to make their lives more pleasant. It's basically the natural place, because that's what he's looking for. He's not doing it to get necessarily a bracha directly to his father, but there's no question, midah keneged midah. You give tzedakah in a cause that you're connected with, it's going to have that type of impact. Measure for measure. Okay. We have here some follow-up. One of them I'm going to do next week because I don't think we have the time. So I'll just do Hiyuli, and then I'll do the Chassidus question and the essays. So last week in episode 168, we spoke about the Hiyuli. What is the Hiyuli? It was the Chassidus question of the week. And I spoke about it from several sources. I want to just add a bit, and also someone that wrote in from a mimer from the Friedrich Rebbe, but I want to specifically refer to Yud Beis, volume 2, chapters 321, 322, where he speaks the difference between hiyuli and gilui. There he talks about 4 different types of relationships. Gilui ahelam, revealing the concealed. Yesh ma'ayin, creating something new. Koyach and poil, potential and actual, or faculty and actualizing a potential. And etzem and ispashtus, a core and its extension or expression. But he adds there's a 5th, and he says that hiyuli and gilui is not quite like any of those. And he explains because hiyuli doesn't, koyach, when you say you have a faculty, you have the power to write. You have the power to throw a stone. And then you throw a stone. So the power is still in a potential state, but you can't call it hiyuli because it's still just one step away. Hiyuli actually does not have in it any type of limited capacity. It's complete state of utter, I could say an archetype as I discussed potential. So I just wanted to refer that to those chapters, 321, 322, fascinating chapters on what a hiyuli is. An individual wrote in as well about Koyach hiyuli from Tafshin Yud Aleph, which is the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimorim of the Hemshech Tzadik Daled, page 162. But similar to what it says in Ayin Beis, and similar to what I spoke about, he says, but kol koyach, in every faculty there's a koyach kloli, what's called hiyuli. And there it has potential faculties. Specific faculties. So even though every faculty is the source and the power of doing something actual, from potential to actual, but there's the so-called the potential of the potential. And he uses the example I gave, the power of movement. So I refer you to that page on 162 in Hemshech Tzadik Daled, which is Sefer Tafshin Yud Aleph, because the Rebbe continued to publish Maimorim of the Friedrich Rebbe even after Yud Shvat. So you have a Sefer Maimorim Tafshin Yud Aleph that has these Maimorim. Okay, thank you for that. Let's move now to the question, this week's question. See this question? Dear Rabbi, I have 2 questions from Tanya, chapter 8. Perek teaches us that forbidden foods have permanent negative spiritual effects on the body and soul. Forbidden foods, meaning things that are not kosher and are impure and so on. How is it then that Chazal have disagreements on the permissibility of certain foods? If one says that it's prohibited, meaning that it receives its energy from klippus atmeis, from the 3 impure, the most impure forces, how can another say that it's permitted? Are the effects of the food real or not? And then there's a second question. Let me answer this first question, then I'll deal with the second question. The same question you could ask, and the Rebbe speaks about this in letters, and I think I've spoken about it in the past as well. The same thing you could ask, for example, if a person is not allowed to eat a certain food, it's absolutely tamei and treif, chazer. Comes Yom Kippur, pekuach nefesh, a person's, God forbid, in danger, the only thing to eat is that piece of chazer, and Yom Kippur you're not allowed to eat, and you're not allowed to eat chazer at any time. So it says, pekuach nefesh, decha kol atera kula. Pekuach nefesh, you could eat the dover aser. At that moment, as the Alter Rebbe says later in Geras HaKedesh, it becomes like a dover heter, or even mamish, a dover heter mamish. Why? Because the word isser and heter, as he explains in chapter 8, comes from the word bound and unbound. Heter means to unbind something. Something's tied up, trapped. It's all tied up in fetters. That's asr. Asr b'deach etzenim means it's tied up, it's controlled by negative forces. So take, for example, let's say somebody in war, God forbid, is taken hostage or is captive. So it would be dangerous to go try to free that person because they're controlled in a prison that's very well protected. Anyone goes there is going to get hurt. That's an example. Asr b'deach etzenim. Something is trapped in the hands of the negative dark forces. To the point that Chassidus sometimes uses the example, chaticha nasa nevela. It would be like a pure piece of kosher meat that fell into a pot of non-kosher meat. So the kosher meat is always kosher, but now it's fallen into a pot. Now it's under the control, and it becomes like a nevela. It becomes like the unkosher nevela that consists of the majority of whatever that pot consists of. That's asr. Heter means it's mutter, means it's untied, and you're able to redeem the spark. Now, all sparks are in some way trapped in this world. When you eat a piece of bread or wine or drink a cup of wine, kosher, I'm talking about food, it's also a spark that needs to be redeemed. How do you redeem it? Through the making a bracha, through the kavanah that he says to use it l'shem shamayim, eat it for the proper reasons, eat it for getting the strength that you can use to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, and so on. So the nitzvus is also there, but the nitzvus is not so trapped among enemies that you can't free it. Think of it more like it's there, but you can free it, but you need to get in there to free it. Then there are things that are so tied up and so bound, like I said, captive and hostage among the enemy, that you can't enter there because you'll become also taken hostage. It's too dark for you to go there. That's a davar asur. Comes Yom Kippur, however, pekuach nefesh, or Shabbos for that matter, it says not only you're permitted to eat it, it's a mitzvah to eat it. Others say it's actually mekadesh hashash. If you don't do that, because the whole Torah was given to bring life, v'chai b'hem. If you don't, you eat that food and you say, I'm going to be meser nefesh, I'll allow myself to die and not eat, that's desecrating Yom Kippur or Shabbos. I'm not getting down to the opinions whether you could do yarek val yaver even on mitzvahs that are not those three cardinal sins. So what happens? The Eibishter, in his infinite power, in a sense, is giving you a passageway into the prison among the enemies, because it's Yom Kippur and Pekuach Nefesh, allows you to extract the spark, even though generally it would be usher, but now, in this day, and for this person, you freed it for that moment. And as such, what do you mean for that moment? Means that power that you get from that food, even if it's chazer mamish, God is giving you the power to be able to use it for something because you're saving a life with it. And the Rebbe explains at length, do you actually change the personality of the food, or is it only changed for the gavra, for the person, or only for the time? That's another discussion, but that's the point. So the same can be said when there are two opinions about something. The question is one opinion holds it's too trapped that you can't free it, and that's why you're not allowed to eat it. The other one holds it's not that trapped and you could eat it. So it's not a machlekes in mitzias. It's a machlekes. They have a disagreement. How badly trapped is that spark? Now, whatever the halach is, if the halach is like the one that says you're not allowed to, that means you can't free it. The one that says you could, you could. The other opinion says, even though the halach is not like the one that says it's forbidden, he would say it's a more difficult job, and therefore we stay away from it. That's how you would explain the two opinions. In addition, I should add that the Rebbe has shlichus that he spoke about at length, Pesach, Tov Shel Lamed Zayin. I wrote it up in Pilpul in Hebrew. If anybody wants to, just let me know. I could send it to you, which is whether the Isser is a Isser Chefza or Isser Gavra. Like mitzvahs that are only connected to time. For example, Chometz on Pesach. The day after Pesach, you're allowed to eat bread. So on Pesach, the spark in the bread is Osir, means it's bound. Is this only on the person? So 7 days, you're not, the person's not, but the spark is redeemable, but you can't because the person can't touch it? Or does it actually mean that it's also Isser Chefza? Same question can be asked about mitzvahs d'Rabbanon, mitzvahs d'Araisa, and the same thing with the Pekuach Nefesh. Is it a Chefza or a Gavra thing? But that's a longer discussion, not so directly relevant, but also relevant because it also connects to the idea of freeing the spark or not being able to free the spark. Question number 2, wouldn't it be ideal to use the intellect, which is the interface between both souls, to bring us closer to Hashem? Why then does Tanya teach that the studying secular academics causes irreparable damage to the neshama? Why can't it be a conduit to serve Hashem? Well, if you read Tanya properly, he says it could be. If you just study the secular wisdom just for an end itself, then it's metamed, contaminated, because it's not about anything about God. It's about the self, about yesh, about the individual, and about making you more of an ego. But if you use it kagdem lachterbe, as he says, to use it, for example, for parnasa, or like the Rambam and the Ramban, and who knew how to use it, let's say learning mathematics or astronomy for Kiddush HaChedesh, so they're using it actually for Torah and Kedusha, then it is. So I'm not sure what your question is. It only creates irreparable damage if it's not used for what it's supposed to be used. Now, I discussed this more at length in episodes 24, 25, 26, 24 through 27, and episode 143. Let's move to the essays, and let's do that. Okay. So the essays, 3 essays of this year's essay contest. First one is Combating Relationally Assessed Self-Worth and Unactualized Potential by Jordan Goldstein, 24 years old, student, Touro College, Brooklyn, New York. So he focuses on basically that it's all too common that members of today's generation are constantly comparing themselves and their lives to the lives of others. In doing so, they attempt to gauge their marketplace value in order to judge their relative self-worth, social standing, and quality of life. This essay will attempt to demonstrate the unique insights of Chassidus in addressing these problems. And he goes on to explain the difference between a life driven by Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, and God recreating the world all the time, as opposed to a world that is seen as just running on its own. Chassidus can help illuminate this obscurity and distortion characteristic of the human struggle to understand self-worth and purpose. And he, as I said, he says there's the pathological cycle of comparison and self-assessment takes two infectious forms. One is a narcissistic envy and another is a jealousy. And he goes on to explain and analyze that, and then the counter of Chassidus teaches us the inherent self-worth that all people have, and he's citing different sources. Beautiful Hayem Yem, of course, that every individual is required to serve God according to his nature and spiritual level. A person who compares pearls or polished gems, yet occupies himself with baking bread, is considered to have sinned because he's not fulfilling his purpose. That's Chav Hei Nissen Hayem Yem. Similar in Hei Ir Hayem Yem. A nicely done essay about this topic, and commend you for that. And this essay, like all essays, can be seen and read at meaningfullife.com/MyLife, with Essays 2017, as well as if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, we send out the new essays as they are posted. Next one, How Can We Stop Sinning? By Gavriel Elif, 15 years old. Yeshiva Boys School of Pittsburgh, Beechwood, Ohio. Is it Pittsburgh or Beechwood? He's probably from Pittsburgh, Ohio. And he writes, "We are in a world full of atrocious things, but they're so cleverly integrated in our life that it's extremely hard to realize them for what they are and not do them. I have written this essay to help a person stop sinning. There are sources from the Talmud and Chassidic sources of ways to stop sinning." So you can see this is written by a younger person. I'm not saying that in any dismissive way, but I really commend the idealism that through looking at Chassidus you could actually stop sinning. So I find this very fascinating essay that's refreshing for all of us to read, because this is written by someone who's clearly not jaded yet and resigned. And he goes through realizing how our actions affect others, everyone's actions matter, stopping the spirit of folly, ruach shtus, our instructions from Hashem, why does Hashem test us? Now it's your turn, the power of your initiative and commitment. Very nicely done, I must say. And as I said, I hope that reading this can actually help us stop sinning. That would be beautiful. So thank you for that. And finally, Essay 3, The Attention Obsession, by Levi Talashevsky, 19 years old. Lamplighters, La Paz in New Mexico. Melbourne, Australia. The Attention Obsession. Again, I'm amazed by the ages of the writers. The average age, by the way, are all in the early 20s. And some younger, as you see, a little older, but tremendous. This is what we want our next generation to be doing. Anyway, he writes about the attention obsession. The millennial age has developed a growing obsession with attention. Overnight celebrities, the Facebook friends, posts, and so on. Chassidic principles, as well as contemporary literature, both touch on the issue of judgment and the fallibility of using validation as a means of measuring one's success. The need to be happy with oneself for who they are and not for who others think they should be is discussed at length in both sources and will ultimately provide readers with a method with which one may overcome his or her folly to pursue a purposeful and meaningful life. Goes on to analyze the issue of needing acknowledgement of others. That is more important for many people than doing the right thing. Okay, and analyzes that, and then goes and what Chassidus says. Takes from Kuntur Samayon about overcoming folly, the Rebbe Rashab, how to deal with the Ruach Shtus, and how therefore all the negative forces of acknowledgement of others leads into gossip and slander and invalidation of others. And the counter force of Chassidus, application of Chassidus, details every creature in this world has a specific mission, its purpose. And that's what the focus is. When you have that focus, then you're focusing on your role as opposed to your definition of self in juxtaposition to others. And sums up the method provided in chapters 29 and 30 in Tanya, setting aside time for humbling oneself, being lowly of spirit before every man, and concludes that pursuit of attention and the inherent need for validation are often a primary cause for judgment, conformity, and depression. The need to keep up with developments in one's social circles and to secure an appreciating amount of recognition leads a person away from his idealistic associations and to the world and into the world of insecurity. And of course, this exacerbates the damage done and can cause great problems in the future. It is only through living mindfully and taking care of our relationships with others that one may invest in a purposeful and meaningful existence. Another well-done essay. As we continue to read each week these essays, and I thank you for that. And what can I say? It's a great honor to be able to be partners with all these beautiful writers who've invested time and energy in really sharing their lives and sharing applications of Chassidus to real life issues. I don't see anything greater to be involved in today. I do want to also say that I will, at the request of many, begin a new piece, a new so-called section from time to time, maybe weekly at some point in this MyLife, and that is to take concepts in Chassidus and apply them in simple English, like how do we explain the Shamit to children or to adults? How do we explain Seder Shtalshlus? How do we explain Oyed? So though we have Chassidus questions, and we do cover these, but I'll be focusing on, so if you have any on actual ideas or concepts in Chassidus, translate it into real practical application. So if you have any questions in that regard, please pose them, as well as any question. Nothing's off limits. At our anonymous forum, meaningfullife.com/mylife. This has been a special 90th anniversary episode program in honor of Yud Beis Tammuz 90 years later. Everyone should have a Chaga Geula, a Geula that will lead to the Geula Amitis Vashlema, and a month of Tammuz that should be Hofchi Yom Mel Sosn Simcha L'Moedim Tevim, Simcha and Sosn, the Geula Amitis Vashlema. Every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 169. Next week we'll do episode 170, Sunday from 8 to 9. Everyone be well and be blessed. Thank you.